So today we're going to talk about something a little different. Normally I just review science fiction and horror movies, but today I'm going to review a comedy. Now, as I've said in the past, I don't really like comedies much, at least Western ones. There's a lot of Japanese, like romantic comedies or romantic melodramas I like. Stuff like Maid Sama or Love Chiobu and Other Delusions. It gets kind of difficult for some of them. Like a large portion of Rosen Maiden is comedy. I'd say even more than like the dark fantasy aspects of it. But it wouldn't be classified as a comedy. It'd be classified as like gothic fantasy or supernatural or something like that. So it is kind of hard with some shows where you're going to draw the line. But yeah, I generally speaking prefer Japanese comedies. There are some Western comedies I like. Like I would say my favorite comedies of all time would be Dude, Where's My Car? I really like the first Zoolander. I haven't seen the second because it looks horrible. Most of the Mike Myers movies, at least the 90s ones, both Austin Powers parodies are really good. The Spy Who Shagged Me is one of my favorite comedies of all time. It might be my favorite. That or maybe this film. Both Wayne's World I really enjoyed. Maybe a couple classics, like I did like Doctor Strangelove a lot. Some of them, though, are kind of like, I guess they're technically comedies, but I don't, if I think of like good comedies, they don't come to mind. Like, I don't really think of Ghostbusters as being a comedy. I think of it as being like a supernatural or horror movie that has a lot of comedic elements to it, rather than being a comedy per se. But I mean, obviously, stuff like Ghostbusters would be on there. I like Princess Bride. Once again, with the Disney movies, I don't know what something like Hercules would count as, or a lot of the kind of cross genre movies that they made. But yeah, particularly post 90s, I'm just not a huge fan of a lot of the comedies that came out after that. They just kind of went like, they both became really crude, but really like politically correct, if that makes sense. Like, they don't want to make like racial jokes or like G slur jokes anymore or stuff like that. They don't really do anything politically incorrect. They just have a lot of like really crude, unfunny sex jokes rather than try to do like real social commentary or real parody or like set up real jokes. And it's often just like really lame situational comedy. I mean, like let's think about this for a minute. We went from stuff like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which I don't know how you feel about Will Smith in that show, but I thought it was pretty funny. I didn't watch a ton of it, but it was also very wholesome in a lot of ways. Even something like Full House, which, while not always the funniest, or Saved by the Bell, were fairly kind of wholesome, typical Americana. And now we have stuff like Modern Family and Veep, and just like the most disgusting stuff you can imagine. So that's just a bit about comedy. So that brings us to this movie, Office Space. So this is by the great Mike Judge. So Mike Judge is known for a lot of different things, specifically Idiocracy, Beavis and Butthead. I haven't seen Silicon Valley, but I've heard it's good. King of the Hill's probably the one he's best known for. So I find he's just really good at doing social commentary things that just kind of show the perspective of the world from kind of like a normal person's viewpoint, which is something that's kind of nice because in a lot of cases I find with Hollywood, even if they're portraying people who are theoretically low status, they still live in like massive houses and have tons of money. Like low status by their standards is like people who make 200K and have a 4-bedroom house rather than like make $1 million a year and live in a mansion. But yeah, Mike Judge is good. And this film was one of his better stuff, to be honest. So that long introduction being said, let's get into Office Space. So Office Space was made in 1999. That was a good year for movies because I think The Matrix came out that year. Let me just double check. Yes, that did come out in 1999. So I mean, that's good. It is a comedy very similar to Dilbert. I'm not sure if the comic strip and cartoon that this is based on preceded Dilbert or came after. It's different enough that I would say it's neither's really a ripoff of the other. But if I had to compare it to something, that'd probably be the thing that I compare it the most to. Although I feel like this is less cynical than Dilbert in some ways. So, Office Space is a film that's all about satirizing and dunking on 1990s corporate culture. Although I would also say that it's just as relevant now. I think it particularly is good if you've worked in an environment like that. Like if you've worked in a corporation, even if you've just kind of gone to school recently, any kind of modern Western corporate structure, this is very much up your alley. I was rewatching this movie after like 15 years from the last time I saw it. And I admit I was kind of getting triggered at parts just because they hit so close to home with like abusive management behaviors I've encountered in the past. Now, once again, I'm sure a lot of this applies to the corporate environment in Japan and Korea or Taiwan or something, but I'm not really that familiar with those. So if people want to talk about it in the comments section, they can. So the star of our movie is Peter Gibbons. The actor does a really good job. So he works for a company called Initech, with Samir and Michael Bolton. And he's a computer programmer, but as he says later on, he probably does about 15 minutes of productive work a week. Mostly what he seems to be doing is just going through all of the company's files and software and changing it from 2 digits to 4 digits because of the year 2000. And the whole thing is just like a shit show. The big thing is the printer in the office doesn't work. They have to fill out these things. I don't even know what it stands for, but they have to fill out these TPA reports on a daily basis. I think something that really kind of triggered me or brought back memories from bad corporate experiences is Peter forgets to put a cover sheet on his TPA report. And he reports to like 8 bosses, I think he said, which I'm used to situations like that. And they all individually come by and lecture him. And they all individually provide him with like written instructions and notices and stuff like that about the TPA reports. And he's trying to leave for the weekend, but his boss, Bill Lumberg, shows up and tells him that he's working for the weekend. Now, part of what makes Bill Lumberg such a like insufferable cunt, I guess you could say, is the fact that he's really passive aggressive about it. So he won't like say you're coming into work tomorrow and just order it. He'll be like, it would be really nice, if you could come in tomorrow, and be like, thanks for agreeing to come in before you can respond. He's just kind of too much of a pussy to just order people to do stuff. So it's this like whole passive aggressive management style, which is really unbearable, to be perfectly honest. It's really obnoxious. So they force him to go in for Saturday and Sunday. His girlfriend, who everybody knows is cheating on him, makes him go to a hypnotherapy session. So the hypnotherapy is really funny because he's talking to the therapist and he goes, every day of my life is worse than the last. My life sucks. He starts talking about how bad it is. He has to go in on both Sunday and Saturday. He has to come in at 9 to 5, maybe longer. And then the therapist is like, okay, well, I'm gonna hypnotize you, and basically hypnotizes him to be like super relaxed. And then he has a heart attack and passes out before he can snap Peter out of it. So Peter is now completely calm, completely chill, doesn't care about anything. And it's made him into a super king and a super Chad. So after the hypnotherapy, he goes back home and he falls asleep And he sleeps until like 2 in the afternoon, and Lumbergh keeps calling him to try to get him to come into work. And his GF gets mad that he isn't calling her back or something like that. So she tells him that she was cheating on him and breaks up with him. So there's a waitress that he has a crush on, played by Jennifer Aniston. I don't know how they got her for this movie. It seems kind of like too lowbrow for her. Then again, I forget if Friends was on at the time, so maybe she wasn't as expensive as you might think. Um, I think Jennifer Aniston's a bit overrated. I think she is an attractive woman. I think people went too far with it. As far as Friends goes, I actually kind of prefer Courtney Cox, but that's just me. But yeah, he goes in and he basically is like, I want to take you out to lunch. I'm going to be next door. Why don't you come? If you want to come join me, do that. If not, then don't. And then she's like, but I'm on shift. He's like, screw your boss. Your boss is an asshole. And she's like, likes his confidence. So she just goes next door and he starts dating her because he's a king. I'm trying to remember the order of events in the movie. So Peter now just doesn't care. I think this is when we have the montage. Um, so they play one of the few rap songs I actually really like. Damn, it feels good to be a gangster. So Peter goes in like his pajamas to work. He parks in Limburg's parking spot. So Limburg parks in the handicap spot, and he gets his car towed, and they destroy his car while they're towing it away. And he does a bunch of stuff, like there's a door handle that gives him a shock every day. There's a um part where he goes fishing with his next door neighbor who's like this blue collar guy, and they catch fish, and he takes one of the fish and like cuts it open and puts the guts on the office's pile of TPA forms. Whenever Limburg tries to talk to him, he just says he's busy. Sorry, Lumbergh tries to talk to him. He just says he's busy and walks away. It's just like, no, I don't want to come into work today. And Lumbergh's kind of a pussy, despite being, because he just kind of abuses his position of authority, and he doesn't know how to react to Peter just telling him to go F himself. So he does like a bunch of other stuff. Like he starts, one of his bosses smacks him really hard on the back, so he smacks that guy really hard on the back. He takes down the wall of his cubicle so he has a view out the window, and just stuff like that. So then the Bobs come in, who are sent from kind of corporate headquarters to do downsizing and fire people. So Peter comes in that day late, and he walks in and talks to them. And since he's so chill, he just explains it to them like it is. He's just like, you don't motivate me. This job's boring. You need to give me stock options if you want me to even like show up. He like tells a bunch of jokes. He brings up the TPA reports. And the Bobs are like, this dude is upper management material. So like, because this is like the 90s and there's all these weird management philosophy things coming around, Peter just not giving a shit but being so confident makes them promote him to senior management, which I think is really funny. So his best friends Michael and Samir are also going to get fired. We also learn that Milton, who is a, I don't know if he has Asperger's or like what it is, but he's like one of the most pathetic people I've ever seen, who after like a decade of serving under Lumbergh has been reduced to this like sniveling mess of a human who wears like giant, I think they're called Coke bottle glasses or something like that. And Lumbergh just keeps moving him around the office solely to screw with him. And he uses his cubicle as like a storage space. So they find out that Milton was actually fired 5 years ago, but no one told accounting. So they were just paying him. So what they decide to do is just stop paying him, but not tell him he's fired until he figures it out. And even later in the movie, when he realizes he's not getting paid, they keep giving him the runaround to try to get as much money out of him as possible, which just seems like a very 90s, early 2000s, like Enron GM type of thing to do. So at this point, Peter just doesn't give a shit. Sure, he got promoted, but he still hates his job. His best friends are going to get fired. So they come up with this plan. Let me try to explain it. So whenever there's a transaction, apparently, and there's a fraction of a cent, it's just rounded up or rounded down. So they're going to put in this computer virus that is going to transfer that fraction of a cent to another bank account. So it's not even going to be noticeable because it's rounded anyways. But over a couple of years, it'll be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars that they can take out of the company. So they implant that on their last day. Peter steals the malfunctioning printer, and we get probably the most famous scene in the movie where the three guys go to a field and destroy the printer to another like montage. But then things start to go downhill. So his girlfriend, someone tells him that she had sex with Lumberg. Although ultimately it's a different Lumberg who's completely unrelated to his boss. But he breaks up with her because he keeps imagining his boss whenever he like sleeps with her. There's also a bug in the code that causes the virus to steal 300 grand in a couple days. So they're trying to figure out what to do, if they're gonna like return the money, if they're going to try to launder the money. There's like this black guy who comes up to sell the magazines. And they're like, look, you're black. Could you tell us, like, could you hook us up with a crack dealer? And then I think I can't exactly remember. I think that he initially says he got off crack and he's like, no, I was actually on it. Or I forget if it was that or he's just pretending that he was on crack and got off of it. But anyway, so what winds up happening is Peter decides he's going to take responsibility for it because he was the one who came up with the plan and he pressured the other two guys into it. So he writes out a full confession along with the traveler's checks, and he puts it under Lumberg's office door. He reconciles with Joanna, his GF, sorry, who starts with another at another restaurant after telling her boss to go fuck off. It's kind of funny because at her restaurant, they say she has to wear at least 15 pieces of flair, and she wears 15, and they keep like telling her passive aggressively she needs to express herself by doing what they tell her to do. So she eventually just tells them to fuck off and quits. So he puts it under Joanna's door. So they come in the next morning. Peter goes to Initech. He's expecting to be arrested, and the whole building has been set on fire. So we find out that Milton finally just couldn't take it anymore and set the building on fire. He'd been kind of impotently threatening to set the building on fire or do other stuff for the duration of the movie, but he finally just went out and did it. Milton takes the traveler's checks and goes on vacation to Mexico, so he gets away with it. Samir and Michael Bolden go to Initech's rival company, Initrode. They offer to get Peter a job, but he takes up a job with his next door neighbor in construction work, which he likes a lot more than his office job. I think the last line is, "This isn't so bad, making bucks, getting exercise, working outside." And then his friend's like, fucking A. And he's like, fucking A. And then that's the end of the movie. It's kind of funny because the ending is that his first construction job is shoveling the burned remains of Initech. So that's Office Space. This movie is really funny, really insightful, really well written. Most of the performances are good. It just kind of summarizes everything that a good comedy should be. It's relevant. It's not really derivative of other stuff. It's obviously it's funny, creative. It's just a really solid, good movie on the whole. So I would highly recommend this movie. Definitely go see it after this review. You won't regret it. That's all I have to say today. God bless. Talk to you guys later.